My name is Gary Kenton, and I am the chair of the Immigration Policy Reform Roundtable, and that is part of the League of Women Voters. And if the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that helps shape public policy and promotes citizen participation at all levels of government. That's what we do. First, let me say, as I think you all just got a notice, this is being recorded. So if anyone has any problems with that or any issues with that, please put something in the chat. We'll address that. So we have the League of Women Voters. We don't provide direct services. We are thrilled to have with us a number of agencies represented that do provide direct services, and we're pleased to have them here to talk about the situation regarding our Afghan refugees, our new Afghan neighbors. So we want to honor those groups that are doing the hard work on the front lines, and I'm going to introduce our main speakers. They are Megan Shepard. She is the Office Director of a Church World Service Greensboro Immigration and Refugee Program. She has been working with the Greensboro refugee community since 2011, and she joined Church World Service in 2014 and has been in her current role since 2017. Maria Cortez-Perez, on the upper left-hand corner of my screen anyway, she is the Refugee Community Organizer for Church World Service Greensboro. She's a graduate of the Wake Forest University class of 2020, newly minted, I guess you'd say, and as the teachers and students there discovered, she's passionate about immigrant rights and social justice. So with that, I will hand it over to our lovely friends from Church World Service.
Thank you, Gary, so much for that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Cortez, and give me one second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And slideshow. Okay.
There you go.
All right. All right, well, once again, thank you everyone for being here today, from the media to community members, allies. We really appreciate your time and energy. My name is Maria Cortez-Perez, and I am the CWS Church World Services Refugee Community Organizer. And today we will be talking about welcoming Afghan neighbors to the Triad and advocacy and community support message. So before I begin, I just want to go ahead and say thank you to our co-sponsors, North Carolina African Services Coalition, New Arrivals Institute, UNCG Center for New North Carolinians, yours truly, Church World Services, and the League of Women Voters of the Piedmont Triad Immigration Roundtable. We wouldn't have been able to have this event without your support, so we really appreciate that. So here in the screen, you will see the agenda on the left. We're going to give a brief history of the Afghan crisis, what resettlement agencies are doing, a call to action, then Mr. Farid will share his story, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. So, one second. All right. All right, so we're going into a brief history of the Afghan crisis. All right, so today we are here to discuss a humanitarian issue that impacted Afghanistan last year in 2021, as everyone is aware of at the moment. After we saw the United States and allies retreat from Afghanistan after decades of supporting reconstruction of the Afghan government, we saw how Afghan families were terrified of what would come after the Taliban deliberately took over their government. Families and individuals that worked closely together with our military were being targeted for aiding the US military. Interpreters, writers, journalists, reporters, children and women were and are some of the most vulnerable targets. So as a result, you may ask, what led us to this crisis, right? So let's take it back to the Trump administration. The US began peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban, including the fact that President Trump decided to officially withdraw from Afghanistan by 2021. Then in 2021, when President Biden assumed power, Biden continued the withdrawal. Things were already beginning to tense up on the ground. However, with the news that the US government and allies were retreating, the Taliban felt more confident about their plan to overrun and take over Afghanistan. Actually, 15 days before the allies, including the United States, departed on August 31st, the Taliban entered Kabul and a battle unraveled on August 26th with bombings between the Taliban insurgents and the US, which killed 200 Afghan individuals. Unfortunately, the withdrawal was not good, and the United States and allies were ill-prepared to handle a post-Afghan government collapse, the Taliban takeover, and an evacuation of hundreds of thousands of people, and a protocol in place to help families and individuals that aided our troops to transition into life in the United States. So other challenges that our families, our Afghan families are facing right now due to the crisis: women are being forced to conform to a more strict interpretation of Islam. They cannot go out in public unless accompanied by a male guardian. Girls above the age of 12 are not allowed to go to school. And there are sanctions being placed on Afghanistan right now, which means that the bank reserves are frozen and the economy is collapsing. And according to the World Food Program, 98% of Afghans are starving. And they don't have enough food to eat on a daily basis because of these sanctions being in place. So as we go through this forum today, I want everyone to keep the lives of these women, men, and children in mind. Not only have they experienced the violence in war on a regular basis for over 3 decades, but now they are being displaced from their home countries. That in and of itself is a heavy and very saddening transition for people. I think, if we were to experience something like that, we would all be devastated, and we would need the support of our community to be able to move forward in our lives, right? So this is why we need to support our Afghan neighbors. And I'm going to go ahead and also share with you that even though there are some very difficult situations that our Afghan families are going through, there was, I'm so sorry, give me 1 second. Thankfully, thankfully, we were able to admit some of our Afghan families and individuals into the US through the SIV program. So thankfully, due to people like you, there was a national and international response that has since aided Afghan families by helping them flee to safe havens. So about 130,000 Afghan arrivals arrived to US soil or military bases around the world. Those Afghan individuals that were evacuated, some were admitted through the special immigrant visa program, which I just mentioned. A visa for those who worked for the US government for at least a year and qualified to apply for a visa, and a pathway to residency status in the US. Mind you, this process to obtain this status takes years. Because of how swift the withdrawal happened and the Taliban taking over, hundreds of Afghan individuals who worked for the US were asked to destroy all their documents and any evidence that would suggest that they were involved in aiding the US. Meaning a majority of Afghan individuals and families were not able to apply for the SIV program. So, however, due to the advocacy efforts of grassroots organizations and resettlement agencies, we were able to get other Afghan refugees a status under humanitarian parole, which my colleague Megan Shepard will go into more detail about in a few moments. But essentially, this is a temporary status to be in the US for 1 to 2 years. And Congress passed the APA, or what we call the Afghan Assistance Program, to provide resources for families as they transition into American life. Now, as you can see, we need to establish a safe and secure pathway to permanent status for Afghan families. As we welcome Afghan families into our communities, they need a sound opportunity to be able to create a normal life here in the US. We have the ability to do this and responsibility as well. This is a humanitarian issue that requires our utmost attention for it is part of what makes us this human global family. It also uplifts our values as a country of immigrants, a welcoming country where you can achieve your goals and dreams. So thank you everyone so much, and I will hand it over to my colleague, Megan Shepard, Director of Church World Services.
Thanks, Maria, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and allowing us to share this information with you tonight. Again, my name is Megan Shepard. I'm the director for CWS Greensboro Immigration and Refugee Program. We're one of 3 local refugee resettlement agencies here in Guilford County and one of many across the state of North Carolina. Before I jump into more of the role that refugee resettlement agencies play, I'd like to provide a little bit more context as to what is humanitarian parole, as Maria just mentioned a moment ago. So majority of Afghans who have been evacuated from Afghanistan and who are currently on US military bases while their cases are being processed have been granted humanitarian parole. Humanitarian parole, as Maria mentioned, is a temporary immigration status. It's generally granted for up to 2 years. It does provide work authorization. So individuals with humanitarian parole would legally be allowed to work. They would receive employment authorization documents from the US Department of Homeland Security. They would also be eligible for Social Security numbers. As of September, Afghans granted humanitarian parole are eligible for all refugee services and public benefits. And this is a really important note. Humanitarian parole within US immigration is an immigration status that has existed before the evacuation of Afghans. However, typically this immigration status did not provide the services and support for individuals with this immigration status. So that's a really important piece. And I think a lot of that advocacy piece that Maria mentioned has been really integral in making some of those changes. Go to the next slide, please. So I want to just kind of get everyone caught up to speed as far as what are resettlement agencies and really what is the role of resettlement agencies, particularly in the context of the evacuation of Afghan allies. So there are 9 national resettlement agencies in the US who are contracted with the US government to provide initial services and ongoing support to refugees arriving through the US Refugee Admissions Program. Local offices exist in communities across the US. So as I mentioned earlier, in Guilford County, we have 3 refugee resettlement agencies: CWS, African Services Coalition, which is a local affiliate of ECDC, and also World Relief in High Point. In North Carolina, 8 of the 9 national agencies are represented. So we've had a very long history of resettling refugees in our state, and particularly in Greensboro. Just for some context too, North Carolina has always ranked somewhere between 10th and 12th in the US for the number of refugees that we've resettled. So it's definitely been a really big piece of our identity and history in the state. Refugee resettlement agencies provide a plethora of services, including, but certainly not limited to, securing housing for new arrivals, providing basic needs assistance such as food, clothing, toiletries, and other household supplies, providing cultural orientation, issuing financial assistance, providing case management and referral services, as well as employment services and job placements. What is really important to note too is that although resettlement agencies are contracted with the US government and the programs of the local communities play a really role piece in the resettlement of refugees. So that partnership is essential, and it's certainly been very essential as we've been responding to the evacuation of Afghans. Resettlement agencies implement a variety of different programming, including federal, state, and in some cases privately funded programming, which support the overall economic self-sufficiency and holistic integration of refugees for years after they arrive to the United States. So it's not limited to just kind of those initial first few months, but really a long-term supporting role. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So as Maria mentioned, after the US began to evacuate Afghan allies and they were evacuated to US military bases, the US State Department, the Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration under the US State Department implemented the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program in response to the evacuation of Afghan allies. And this program started in September of last year and is expected to run through September of this year. It's modeled after the Reception and Placement Program, or the initial refugee resettlement program, and it is specifically for those who've been granted humanitarian parole. Essentially how it is working is that parolees who are currently on US military bases will be allocated to local resettlement agencies like CWS or African Services Coalition or World Relief across the US. And resettlement agencies are then providing those similar type services to parolees as we do refugees, such as securing housing and providing cultural orientation, providing basic needs support, and connecting newcomers to various local resources for those first 90 days. We're also administering per capita funding during that program period, which will be used to secure housing and make sure those basic needs are met. And that funding is modeled after the Reception and Placement Program as well. But aside from this initial 90-day program, there is other programming such as intensive case management and employment services that are available to those who have been granted humanitarian parole beyond the 90 days, including, as I mentioned, intensive case management and employment services. Maria, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So since October, hundreds of Afghans have arrived in Greensboro and Guilford County. CWS, so far since October, we have resettled 107 Afghans. It's 52 cases, with more expected to arrive in the coming weeks. In response to such a large influx of arrivals, CWS and many other resettlement agencies across the US have really relied heavily upon community support through donations, volunteers, and particularly community co-sponsorship. Community co-sponsorship is when a community group of volunteers work together to welcome refugees by assisting in the process of resettlement and integration. So these are volunteer groups that are partnering with refugee resettlement agencies and really have been doing incredible work. Co-sponsors may be expected to assist with securing housing for newcomers, enrolling children in school, providing transportation to appointments. They're helping get families connected to various resources and assisting with various self-sufficiency goals, such as securing employment or learning to drive. You can go to the next slide, please. So some of the challenges that we've already seen and we certainly anticipate is that, you know, as Maria explained in her timeline for, you know, kind of what happened leading up to the fall of Afghanistan and afterwards, certainly these individuals have undergone very recent and profound trauma and loss. And it's really quite unimaginable the amount of trauma and loss these individuals have endured. We've talked a little bit more about humanitarian parole, and as you've probably gathered, with it being a temporary status, it is limited and really kind of offers few protections for individuals because there really isn't a clear pathway for legal permanent residence or US citizenship. At that 2-year mark or before the 2-year mark, individuals would either need to try to renew their humanitarian parole or apply for asylum. So there is no kind of automatic path or adjustment they can make to provide them that safety and security. Of course, on our end, we've had a lot of concerns just around the availability of safe and affordable housing. It's important to acknowledge that, while we're truly responding to an emergency situation, and we've been having to kind of piece things together in real time, we've still been living and working in a pandemic, and that there are still a lot of people in our community who have been deeply affected by COVID-19. There are people who, fewer people who are moving or who have come across hard times. And so things like housing, available housing market has certainly been affected and impacted by COVID-19. Up until October, we had a very small Afghan community in the Triad. We have a much larger Afghan community now, but certainly in kind of our preparations and thinking through the types of support individuals would need, that was certainly a consideration for us, just in terms of language support and community support, culturally appropriate places to gather or food, etc. Family separation, of course, is a concern, and also the options for people to be reunited with their loved ones, many of whom are still in Afghanistan. Resettlement agencies have also been uncertain of how many people will arrive and for how long of a period they will arrive. Will it be over just a few months? Will it be over a year period? We just don't really know. At this point in time, there is a push to get those who have been evacuated off of military bases by February 15th. The last numbers I heard was there was an estimated between, I think, 20 and 25,000 individuals still on US military bases. And so, just since October, we've seen over 100 individuals arrive, and it might be possible that we continue to see that number creep up a little bit as we, continue to meet this need and respond to the emergency. But there have been a lot of unknowns in this, so planning has been difficult on the agency side of things and implementing programs. Just another note too for resettlement agencies in terms of planning is that we've generally received very limited biographical information prior to the arrival of Afghans, which is unlike refugee cases. So it's not uncommon for us to maybe not have employment or education history or know the language or medical needs upfront, which certainly makes it difficult to plan. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Some other considerations, and I think some of this is really important as community members and as you might be interacting and engaging with Afghan community members, that it's these are folks who are coming from a very varied background and have many different experiences. We've seen that many of our Afghan clients are highly skilled and educated, but that it is varied. The language needs generally are Pashto and Dari. Those are the two primary languages. We have seen a lot of people with really excellent English, but not everyone does speak English. It's an ethnically diverse population as well. The largest groups include Pashtuns, which are Pashto speaking, and Tajiks, which are Dari speaking, and it's predominantly Muslim culture. The documentation that people have been arriving with has varied some as well. They may have an I-94, which is a document similar to refugees. You know, eventually they'll receive their employment authorization cards and social security cards, but there's an uncertainty around the timeline in which they'll receive those.
All right, Megan is, oh, there she is. Okay. You froze up for a second.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
You're back.
I just got
now.
a message that my internet was unstable. Sorry about that. Is there anything you need me to repeat?
You were on the timeline that being unknown.
Okay.
I think you were up to that last item.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you. So individuals who have worked with the U.S. military, contractors, or non-government organizations may be familiar with U.S. Bureaucracy, but like many other refugees or newcomers, U.S. systems, you know, will still be new and may be challenging for them to navigate. You can go to the next slide. This might actually be my last slide. It is. Great. And I will hand it back over to Maria, and happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.
Right.
Yes, thank you so much, Megan. That was super informative. And yes, now we're on the advocacy call to action. So now it's time for you guys to take out your pen and paper, because we're going to highlight what you can do as an individual to support our Afghan families. So urge your members of Congress to pass the Afghan Adjustment Act. As you all have noticed, humanitarian parole was a huge theme throughout our presentation tonight. And it's actually something really important that we need to focus on. So this piece of legislation would allow Afghans arriving with humanitarian parole, which is a temporary status, to have the opportunity to apply for lawful permanent status, the same legal status they would have received had they been admitted as refugees. Doing so will provide a roadmap to permanent status for Afghans on humanitarian parole for 1 year. And this is important, ladies and gentlemen, because we don't want this temporary visa to expire and our Afghan families to be left in limbo without a pathway to citizenship. So what our allies, and yes, I mean, and when I say allies, I'm speaking about the Afghan families and individuals that worked for and helped our US military for 2 decades, risking their lives. Our allies deserve our support, and we have the ability to facilitate this process. So for those on the Zoom, I'm going to actually share this, this link. And come up here and share it on the chat. There you go. If everyone would like to click on it, please. And then I'm going to come back to the slideshow. Okay, so when you click on it to my left, this is the web page that should pop up. And so if you turn to my screen, there is a feature that is circled in red. And what I love about our media calls to action pages is that Church World Services provides a virtual engine where you type your phone number and your address and your zip code, and then you press the call officials button, and it automatically calls your phone and connects you to your congressional representative. And you either speak to the secretary or the representative himself, or you leave a message with the following details on my right of the PowerPoint slide. So please take out your phones and take a picture of the script if you would like. The link I shared with you needs to have an updated script, so I do apologize for that. But what's on my PowerPoint screen is the most up-to-date script that we would like you to use. So please, once again, I'm giving everyone a moment to take a picture of the script. And as everyone does that, to my right, the script addresses your Congress member, who you are and where you're from, and the advocacy ask. So for example, dear Congress member Kathy Manning, I'm your constituent from High Point, North Carolina. And as a person of faith, I urge you to provide the necessary funding for fiscal year 2022-23 and include the passage of the Afghan Adjustment Act. This legislation would allow Afghans arriving with humanitarian parole who were evacuated from Afghanistan to have a pathway to permanent status. And so, et cetera, and then you thank your Congress member at the end. You address them by their name, thank you for your support, and then you sincerely end your call. So, other ways to support. You can write a letter to your Congress member, or you can try to invest resources in one of your local resettlement agencies by donating money, or you can donate furniture so that we can help our Afghan families get situated here in the Triad. Or if you're part of an organization, or if you have a business, issue a public statement in support of welcoming Afghan families and neighbors. Share welcoming messages on social media, like pass the hashtag Afghan Adjustment Act now, or hashtag welcome home our Afghan neighbors to safety in the US. If you're part of a church and your church is really invested and would like to support, your church can become a co-sponsor. As my colleague Megan Shepard shared earlier, what you would basically be doing is a group of people from your church would be volunteering their time to help situate our Afghan neighbors in the area. If you all maybe have a home on the church grounds that you all would like to use to house one of the Afghan families, we are more than happy to work with you. So please, please consider it. And four, you might want to volunteer your time to a local resettlement agency. And fifth, you can also contact me. I am the Church World Service Refugee Community Organizer. And my name is Maria Cortez, and there's my email. And so once again, these are all doable and valid community support activities that you can get involved in. So thank you everyone once again for your time and energy this evening. I'm going to pass it on back to Gary.
Well, thank you, Maria. Thank you, Megan. We planned this, and we sort of gave them the instruction to try to share all that information in half an hour, and they came within about a minute. It's unbelievable. So thank you very much. Wanted to now turn it over to Nonan, and Nonan has some firsthand story that he can share with us. So the floor is yours. Thanks.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing my story. My name is Nonan. I was born as an immigrant in Peshawar, Pakistan. My mom always said that she felt the connection. She had a vision of me excelling in life. I was in Pakistan for 13 years. The Pakistani police didn't turn any stone to humiliate Afghans. And when I was in Pakistan, I have been through a lot of hardships, being harshed in school, being harshed in the street. I remember one of my teachers telling me that you're a son of an immigrant. If it was not for my mom's continued support, I would not have wanted to study. I would not forget a Friday afternoon. I came to home to a scene that I had never imagined. I came to a home, there were a lot of people were crying in our home, men and women. Then I have learned that after a terrorist attack, that many people died in a busy market, including my big brother, my uncle, and my cousin. After that, I have never seen my mom so helpless and so broken. And even today, when I video call with her, I see the pain in her face and her soul. After that, we decided that, okay, we're not safe in Pakistan. We tried to move to Afghanistan, the country that I belong to, the country that I have heard a very nice story about it. We moved to Afghanistan, and my father started working in a youth organization. My brother started working. I was going to school. Everything looks good. Actually, the situation was sometimes good and sometimes bad. But U.S. troops were there, we were comfortable with that. After that, in 2017, I have faced with a gentleman that came from a very influential family that literally opened my eyes about education. That actually in Afghanistan, the education was completely collapsed. It was corrupted. And I call him now my mentor. He just lit up my eyes about education, and he just told me that if you have the opportunity to apply for a scholarship outside of the country, I have been trying to apply for a scholarship that fortunately I got admission in two prestigious universities, one located in Italy and one located in the United States. Because I always considered myself as a business-oriented person, and when I was in 11th grade, I completed a diploma in English, and I wanted to study in abroad because I wanted to acquaint with the culture of people. I wanted to know what is going on in outside of the country. Comes to August 2021, the origin of Taliban and the attack that martyred U.S. soldiers and many Afghans that they were trying to flee from Afghanistan. When Taliban take over Kabul, and American troops pull out of Afghanistan, our family, which is consisted of my mom, my sister, and my brother and father, we all took the impossible task of going to Hamid Karzai International Airport. When we went there, people running all over frantically, as if almost we would think you're under a zombie attack. Once we reached to the airport, you would think that 6 million people that live in Kabul, they suddenly came and they're trying to flee from Afghanistan. You might have seen a lot of videos that people were hiding in fuselage because they would prefer to die in the sky but not live in the regime of Taliban. Once we reached the airport, due to heat exhaustion, my mom fainted and my sister situation get worse. And me and my father just decided that, okay, my brother should take my mom and sister back home. Once we enter the airport, then we will call them once the situation comes. But when we enter the gate, we have faced several air machine gun fire from Taliban, and my father hit by Taliban twice. We were inside the airport for extremely long days, and I was interpreting with Marines. The food that we have given, it was unpleasant because MRE food's just for Marines, and the people who doesn't have the experience of eating that type of food is kind of unpleasant. And after 6 and 7 days, we were taken to Qatar. The food was much better good, and Americans military take good care of us over there, but the weather was too hot because we were standing in a big line for an hour and 2 hours to have a breakfast, to have a lunch, and to have a dinner. After 2 weeks, we just moved from Qatar to Germany for 35 days. We have been we done medical tests, a lot of the stuffs in Germany. Then after 35 days, we landed in Philadelphia. From Philadelphia, we took to New Mexico. When we arrived in the United States to New Mexico, there's a camp called Halimon. The food was much better. I was starting interpreting at the Department of State over there. We were there for 25 days. We were there for 25 days, and we wanted to go to Texas because our relatives over there, my dad's boss was living over there, but Texas, California, Virginia was off limits. Finally, we landed in Greensboro. If I tell you the truth, when I came to the Greensboro, the city was small, and I just thought, oh my God, it's very difficult to survive here. But like the day we arrived, we just looking for a salon, for hairdresser. I just asked a guy, can you just tell me where the salon is? He just told me you're new arrival, and we had a small talk, and I just told him we came from Afghanistan and we were evacuated from Afghanistan. He just took out $50 and he just told me that, okay, your first hair is on me. When I saw that, that was so surprising for me. And when I faced with many people that they're very welcoming, they're very hospitalized people. And I'm like a very selected man that I have been offered from a company that supported me, and I'm very grateful from the CWS. Now I'm working as an interpreter over there. And I always consider myself that short difficulties have a bright future. And I am now happy 50%, and half of my family left behind in Kabul, and I'm concerned about them. Once my family came in front of me, and when I see them in the airport of the United States, I will be 100% happy in my life.
Thank you, Noman. I'm glad the first person you ran into was so friendly. That's very, very nice to hear. But I appreciate that. We're going to go into Q&A. I want to take 1 second to just thank, first of all, Betsy Jensen with the Center for New North Carolinians has really been our host for this event, and all the co-sponsors, the New Arrivals Institute, the African Services Coalition, and of course, Church World Service. So want to thank everybody for putting this all together. So now we're going to open it up for questions and answers. You have the people have already spoken. You have some other people on the call who have been doing this kind of work for a while. So unmute yourself and jump in. I'm seeing a lot of people on the chat are thanking you, Nonan.
Yes, you're welcome. You're most welcome. I see.
Hello, if I could ask a question.
Please, go ahead.
Great. This is Hugh Holston, Greensboro City Council at large. First, I want to say welcome. Thanks for everything you've done. Greensboro is that open and welcoming community. And Nonan, this question is actually addressed directly to you. I saw in the presentation earlier that family separation is a really big issue. Can you tell me how you're dealing with and coping with that family separation issue? You said, I believe half of your family is still back in Kabul.
Well, it's very hard. It's very hard for me and for my dad. And if somebody realized that situation, so they will think that, like now, half of my family left behind in Kabul, and my brother has been targeted. Like the Taliban saying to my brother, "Okay, your father just fled from Kabul to United States, and you should be the victim because your father is not in here." My father served from United States for youth organization for 20 years, and my mom's situation is getting deteriorated. It's getting worse and day by day because when my brother is going outside, she think that okay, she will be the victim of terrorists because now there is no formal government in Afghanistan. So there is no formal government in Afghanistan, and there's a different thieves increase in Afghanistan, different groups origin in Afghanistan. So it's a very hard, but we have a hope that one day our family will come, and we never give up on that situation.
Thank you. And just one more question. You mentioned that you have settled in with CWS as an interpreter. And this may be a loaded question, but do you have enough interpreters working with you?
Pardon me?
Do you have, are there enough interpreters at CWS to handle the 107?
So I'm not the only that I have chosen as an interpreter. There's another interpreter too that he is evacuated from Afghanistan too, called Samir. So we're handling the situation. And also we have a calendar, we're handling the situation very well. So everything is on schedule, everything is timetable, and we are doing very well.
And
I'll just
to add to that too, Nonan, we've been really fortunate to have him as an interpreter. He's, as you can see, he's very well spoken and very professional, and he's just been a really great asset to our team, and as well as our other interpreter too. And they work really well together and work really closely with our team. But we do have access to other interpretation services as well, like phone interpretation. Because they are only 2 people, and we have to acknowledge that that's a big undertaking for only 2 full-time interpreters. So we do have access to some other resources as well for interpretation.
Yes.
Maria, someone has requested if you could stop sharing your screen so that we can all see each other better. I think
Will do.
Great, thank you very much. That's better, makes us, here's our community. I guess the one question is that was put forward is, what is the U.S. government doing to help reunite families? And I know there's already a lot on resettlement agencies, but do either of you know, can either of you answer that question, or?
In short, I mean, there hasn't been much done yet in terms of creating pathways to reunite Afghan families in particular. So I would say if that's another piece of advocacy, it would certainly be a push to create pathways for people to be reunited. For other refugees, there are some options to reunite families, but you know, with the situation in Afghanistan and just the emergency evacuation, I think that certainly has limited the options. So the short answer is no, there aren't really very clear pathways at this moment in time, and it would also just really kind of vary from person to person. But I would really encourage folks to include that in any advocacy, any conversations or communications that you're having with elected officials, is to really urge some sort of pathway for family reunification, particularly for Afghan allies.
Can I just add to that? So I would add, from the legal standpoint, the pathways, I think it was alluded to a little bit earlier, the pathways for Afghan arrivals that have come in on humanitarian parole, if the advocacy doesn't work, if Congress doesn't pass a law that gives them a pathway automatically to a green card, their other pathways are through the SIV program, which Maria talked about, for those who worked for the US government for more than a year or a contractor of the US government. And then the other pathway is asylum. And both of those pathways do have the ability to bring your immediate family, so your spouse and your children who are unmarried and under 21, with to the United States, but none of that is immediate. That is all things that's going to take, 2-3 years, maybe longer. And obviously, given the situation in Afghanistan right now, that's sort of an unbearable thought for most people, I would imagine.
Thank you, Betsy. I think Christina in the chat wanted to know if you needed volunteers. I'm assuming she's speaking about Church World Service, but I think I'm pretty confident in saying the answer is yes, that you and Maria had put her email address. We also have a slide we'll put up at the end that has all the co-sponsoring agencies here tonight and their websites and their phone numbers. So I think Christina wanted to know what skills were needed, and that would be a specific conversation that would have to happen. But the short answer is yes. They'll be happy to take volunteers. Another question about relocating families, hoping that they can come to the same place in the United States. I have a question about Afghanistan also, but I want to say that these subjects are compelling, and Nonan has given us a whole lot more to think about, but I don't want to totally deflect attention away from this effort that this community is undertaking, led by these agencies, to deal with these 107 so far, but more families. It's a big deal, and my impression is Greensboro is stepping up, but we have a lot of work to do. Having said that, another thing we might advocate about is there's literally billions of dollars in the US Treasury that belongs to Afghanistan. And now, understandably, the US government does not want to give that back to Afghanistan right now because they'd be handing it over to the Taliban. So, but there is a huge humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, and that money could go a long way towards relieving that crisis. But so that's another place where we can educate ourselves and perhaps advocate to find a way so that money that belongs to that country can get back to that country. But I think that's something that our government is they'll maybe act quicker if they get some pressure from us. All right. Any other questions or comments?
I just want to share something about what is going on, like the current situation in Afghanistan. Actually, like a few weeks ago, the WHO estimates that children that they are under age of 5, they will die of starvation upcoming winter, means during this winter. Because the Taliban running the government, no money flows in Afghanistan. And as you mentioned, and as Maria mentioned, that people are dying of starvation in Afghanistan. So that's a really important issue. Like, and also it's very difficult for people that they're separated, like half of their family behind in Kabul and half of them they're living in United States. Because I'm a senior man and my father is a senior male, they're living in the United States. And there is no one in Afghanistan that support my family. It's very hard for us. Not just me, there's a lot of Afghans. For example, I remember that I was working at the Department of State and people were coming that why we are not going to our home, why we are not resettling to our home. And the head of the State Department were always saying that we didn't have the experience of 65,000 people coming in a month to the United States. And like 65, I don't know how many people come to the United States, but like if they come 65,000 people remain in Kabul, means they're separated. So it's a very difficult thing.
And I would just like to add to that, I'm going to share again the call to action for the Afghan Adjustment Act. The Afghan Adjustment Act allows for certain Afghan evacuees to be able to apply for permanent status after a year of being paroled into the country, which it relieves the immediate burden on the SIV process, which currently has over 18,000 cases in backlog, and the asylum process, which currently has 1 million cases in backlog, and prevents Afghans paroled in the US from losing their jobs or being deported while their applications for these statuses are pending. So this is why it's really important for us to advocate for the Afghan Adjustment Act, because it might be able to facilitate the reunification of some of these families. But we definitely need to keep pushing, and we need to call your members of Congress, call your senators, send letters so that they can know that this is something important to us. So that's what I wanted to add.
Right.
And I would just add to that also that the US has had a program in place like that before for Cubans. So
Right.
It would not be the first time in US history that accommodations were made for a certain population. So it's totally doable, and it can easily be replicated and implemented with our Afghan allies.
Right. Thank you. Raleigh, Bailey, you want me to ask her a question? I feel silly asking her a question. You want to ask it?
Okay. My question is, between the 3 agencies in Guilford County, about how many have arrived and how many are you expecting? And the same question for North Carolina, between all the agencies.
That's a great question. I cannot speak to the numbers for all of North Carolina. I would estimate somewhere between 12 and 1,500 for the entire state, but that could be more or less. For Greensboro, CWS had initially proposed resettling 100 cases or 100 individuals. We've already surpassed that, and we will continue to accept cases as long as we have the capacity to, with staffing and otherwise. I believe African Services Coalition's number was 300, and they've already reached that or are near reaching that number. For World Relief, I don't know what their proposed capacity was. But I can say that already hundreds of people have already arrived in Greensboro.
Thank you. I saw a question about whether there is resistance to the AAA, the Afghan Assistance Act. I guess there's always resistance to spending money on others, it seems. But I guess Megan or Maria or anyone else want to say how our advocacy is likely to be received?
Yes, so currently the Afghan Adjustment Act, we are hoping that it be included in the new budget proposal for fiscal year 2022 going into 2023. So it's really just a matter of getting our voices out there and contacting our members of Congress, letting them know that we need this legislation added. If it's not, then we probably will have some serious situations when it comes to the statuses of Afghan families. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, this could lead them to undocumented statuses, being in limbo. And we all know how important, or at least I do, I know how important it is as an immigrant, as someone who's documented, the importance of having a Social Security card and a work authorization. So there is hope, but we really need your support. It's really up to us as a community to advocate and to get in contact with our members of Congress and just really sit down with them and just let them know that, hey, like, we really need to pass the Afghan Adjustment Act in order for our families, our Afghan families, to be able to transition into the US smoothly and for them to be able to have the opportunity to create a better life for themselves here on US soil. I don't know if you guys have any other questions about the AA specifically, but that's kind of like what we know so far.
Great. All right, thank you.
I mean, Gary.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. If I was told Marianne had your hand up, and I'm sorry, but I can't see everybody. There's too many people to be on one screen, so I didn't mean to ignore you. Please go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for the information about this asylum status. I was unaware of that. I've worked with refugees for many years, and I have told our family that we're supporting that no, you're not an asylee, you're a refugee. And I kept saying that. So I was totally wrong, and I'm so glad now that I know what the difference is, what this population is, because they kept referring to, no, we're asylees, and I said, no, you're not. Now I know the difference, so I will correct myself and tell them, yes, now I understand, and we have to be advocates for you to become citizens. Thank you.
Right.
And just to clarify, Mary Ann, thank you so much for your comment. Really appreciate it. Asylees are those refugees that are admitted into the US and they're able to seek asylum within US soil. Refugees, they have that label because they're still in their country of origin applying, to come over to US soil. So refugees are those that are still in their home country applying to come to the US, and then asylees are those in our country that are applying to stay in the US. So that's the main difference.
I would just also to clarify, particularly with this Afghan population, I think for just the use of terminology, they're not refugees and they're not asylees. They are humanitarian parolees, which is a very different immigration status and has very different implications. Many people might have to apply for asylum, and if they're granted asylum, then they would become asylees. But I would be really, in terms of a refugee, what does it mean to be a refugee? It is a person who has been forced to flee their home due to a well-founded fear of persecution. Many of our Afghans have been forced to flee their home due to a well-founded fear of persecution, right? But in terms of US immigration law, they are not refugees. And so it means that they are not they are not entitled to the same benefits as refugees or the same benefits of the immigration status of a refugee. And so it's really, really important. And if there's one takeaway, aside from advocating for this Afghan Adjustment Act, that is the one other big takeaway that I really want everyone to understand, is that these are individuals with humanitarian parole. It's a very different immigration status and has different implications, and there really is no clear, safe, and secure pathway for them in terms of their immigration status, unlike refugees and even asylees.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
All
you.
right, it is 8 o'clock, so I'm really happy to stay here. There are a couple of more questions in the chat. We can keep the conversation going as long as people want to stay here and talk about it. But we did tell people that we would be willing to let them go at 8 o'clock. So if people need to go, please do. But we're gonna, keep going if people would like to. Sue Stinson had asked if you can tell you how many refugees are waiting in hotels and other temporary housing right now. Do we know, do you have a number on that?
Sue,
Maria,
that is a
or-
really great question. No, I wouldn't have a number on that. I can't speak to other agencies. We've had to rely a lot on temporary transitional housing though, because of the emergency situation and the push to get folks off of US military bases. So it's certainly not ideal, but I couldn't provide a concrete number for you. I don't know where things stand with other agencies, but I know that we've certainly had to utilize temporary housing.
All right, great. All right, thank you. Bonnie Parsons wants to know about employment. That have any of the new refugees been able to find employment, and if there are any specific companies that we want to thank for hiring in Greensboro?
Well, we work with a lot of employers, hundreds of employers, in fact. So we have a lot of great employers in and around Greensboro that we work with who are always eager to hire refugees. And certainly, I think one thing that has been really quite amazing to me is just across the US, but certainly in our own community, so many people, as everyone was watching the news unfold in Afghanistan and the horrifying, just devastating images and videos of people trying to flee Kabul, so many people were reaching out and trying to offer support in whatever way that was, whether it was, employing people once they arrived here or providing housing or what have you. And so we, all of that is to say we had a lot of employers.
Right. Oh, she's frozen. Okay, you froze for a second.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, sorry. My internet keeps going in and out. I don't know what it is tonight. But we had a lot of employers reaching out to us who were really excited to work and hire arriving Afghans and other refugees as well. So we have hundreds of employers that we work with in and around Greensboro.
Great. All right. Someone asked whether the recording of the presentation will be made available. Yes. Betsy will work her magic and provide it to the league. The league will put it on our website, lwvpt.org, and we'll also put it on our YouTube channel. So yes, it will be made available for folks if anyone wants to catch up with it later or tell other people who might not have been able to join us tonight. Getting a lot of thank yous in the chat, so I'll but I'm not, unless if if somebody's put anything else, I'm not finding any more in the chat right now. If something is there and I'm not finding it, please someone speak up, but I'm not seeing more questions there. So.
Oh, I had a question about how are you able to find housing for all your families when there's this housing crisis?
I have one.
Okay. Does someone want to tackle Rachel? We'll come back to you in a minute, Ms. Copeland. Anyone want to say, the housing thing it was difficult before all these folks arrived. So it's not less difficult, but sometimes different.
No, I just had a question. My question is different.
Okay, but anyone want to address Rachel's question about this process of finding housing? And
yeah, I mean, it's a process. I don't know what all there is to say. One thing that we've been really intentional about doing, even before this emergency situation arose, was investing in a housing specialist. So we actually have a staff member who is fully dedicated to all things housing, and that includes building relationships with landlords and property managers, maintaining relationships, establishing new partnerships, working with other housing entities and advocating for improved housing. So we're really fortunate to have someone who's fully dedicated. It doesn't solve the issue of doesn't just create all of this housing for families, but it does certainly increase our capacity and also just our our vision, which is to really improve quality of housing and the availability of housing, particularly for people who are underprivileged or low income. So it's a process and it'll take time, but I feel confident in the first steps of getting that position filled.
All right, we've had a number of city council people here with us tonight, which is great, and they are working hard through their government agencies and their partners to address our housing problem. This, I think, through churches and other community groups, sometimes I think we can tap into a different process where maybe church members know someone that has an apartment or other things. So spreading the word and sharing this information with people maybe can turn some spaces that wouldn't come up in the bigger citywide efforts to create more housing. So I don't know, I hope that answers your question, Rachel. Ms. Copeland, did you have a question? I'm sorry if I didn't get to you.
Okay.
Gary, did you know the mayor? We heard from Mayor Nancy Vaughn.
I know I saw that she was here.
She sent a chat thanking us for our work.
Okay, great. Thank you for pointing that out. Appreciate it. Ms. Copeland, okay, I see you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Yes, yes, I've just come in contact with some various religious groups where I attended the Y, and they've said that they've done quite a bit to help out some of the Afghanistan families who have newly arrivals. And I wanted to know if there were a number of other church groups of the, I think, Muslim faith, different mosques and so forth. We're talking about contributing. Do you have any information on how many other church groups are contributing?
Well, I wouldn't be able to speak to all of the faith communities and groups who have been supporting these efforts, but I would say that I know on our end, many of our volunteers and co-sponsor groups are from a faith community. Really, I mean, our faith partners and supporters have been really integral in the work that we do for a long time. So there are many and a variety of faith groups that are involved in the resettlement of refugees and certainly in supporting the resettlement of Afghans as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see a message from Sarah Pascal. Sarah, I don't know if you want to speak yourself, but she is a case manager. So she is in contact with some of these Afghan families, and she just is saying how they have expressed their appreciation for the volunteers and the donors and other people who are welcoming them here. So that's very nice. Thank you, Sarah. Anything? I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. You know, speaking on behalf of the league, we're happy to get this in motion. And you know, there on the screen you've got the 5 organizations that co-sponsored this event, but we recognize this is a citywide team effort. And Maria has also put in the chat again the link that we can follow to do the necessary advocacy work.
Hey, Gary?
Yes.
If I may, just on that point that you just made on the advocacy piece, the AAA, the Afghan Adjustment Act, you know, has been ongoing. There have been a lot of effort to get the bill to pass, and we've not been successful. But the last chance we have to get this across the line is to have the AAA included in the funding request through Congress to fund the federal government. So that is kind of the last chance we have. So I want to underline the importance of the action that we're asking people to take, to call their members of Congress, and please urge them to take action on this adjustment act. But that will give the long-term relief of Afghan families 1 year, 2 years from now, for them to be able to have a permanent residency that will allow them in the future to reunite with their loved ones. Thank you.
All right. Raleigh Bailey, thank you, Adamu. Raleigh Bailey noted that there are 2 of the largest mosques in Greensboro have been active in distributing food and helping with interpretation also. So thank you, Raleigh. All right. I'm not seeing other messages. I hesitate to let people go and say we're done, because I value all this information and all this expertise and just this sense of the team effort. So, but unless someone has something else, it's about 8:15. Just want to thank everyone for joining us and for sharing their interest, and thanks again to all the co-sponsors.
And finally, I would just like to thank for the hard work that CWS have done for me and my father. We really appreciate it, and we will always owe. Means we can express ourselves that they're really working hard for everyone, and as a client, I'm very grateful.
That's the last word, I think. So
Best way to end the night.
Thank you, everybody. Betsy, beam us down, Betsy.